Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Meet the Author. Today, we are joined by a very special guest. If you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Evan, also known as That Guy Smoking a Pipe.
And from what I understand, you are the author of A Man of Honor. And today we have a few questions that we just wanted to ask you and to kind of get better acquainted, knowing you a bit more, as well as giving you the chance to talk a bit about your work.
Well, I'm happy to be here.
Definitely. We're happy to have you. So we've got a few just sort of written questions that we can go through, as well as if you have anything specifically you do want to talk about, we're more than happy to go over. But what I want to ask you first is, how are you?
I'm doing pretty well. Life has had its ups and downs of late, but it's been fair to me. I recently finished A Man of Honor, and I am enjoying the break. And so,
okay, that's actually what I was gonna ask about, because we've kept sort of where we're currently at, because a lot of our reactions to it we've wanted to have been genuine, as well as whenever I'm reacting to people who are looking at the actual video itself. But I was gonna ask kind of where it was headed or what your upcoming plans were. And I guess from what my question is now is, what's next for you then?
well, that's a little bit up in the air right now. I definitely have some personal matters I want to see through first. I do have some other more personal projects that I'm working on. For example, I am a game master for a Monday night game with my personal friends, so that's taking up some of my time and creativity at the moment.
I completely understand that.
But I have been considering a sequel story, and I might very well do that. I also have a few ideas for some original work that I might get to.
Yeah, because I was kind of wondering, because with fan fiction writers, in my opinion, it can go either one way or the other, of being either they're interested in the writing portion of it, or they're an extremely big fan of something. Like Patello, when we interviewed him, it was more for him about Beastars rather than it being about any sort of writing that he was doing beforehand. It just was the medium he chose to do. So I was sort of curious as to where you fell in that spectrum of that.
I'm in the middle, I think. I like to write. I actually write every day, be it planning stuff for a game or doing a text-based roleplay with my wife. There's something I'm always writing. But I usually don't write fan fiction for things I'm uninterested in, so I usually kind of have to get the bug, if you will, to actually devote my time to something like that.
Yeah, because I could easily see it kind of being both ways for people, because it takes a lot to fully devote to writing as a whole. That's kind of why a lot of people tend to shy away from this original work kind of thing, is what I could imagine, because it is very daunting to dedicate that much time to it, because it's harder to come up with your ideas. It's harder to sort of go through thinking about every little thing. And I kind of did want to ask too, with writing A Man of Honor, I did see a lot in the notes in general about you doing research for this, as well as the way that you went about each scene, kind of actually relating it to different points in history, as well as the way that it was kind of shown did follow along those lines. So I did want to know what the effort level, I guess, as well as what effort was given when you were writing it.
Well, half of it, I guess you could say, was effort. The other half is just my general curiosity. For A Man of Honor in specific, I've always kind of been a fan of gangster films and mafia history. So a lot of the stuff I put in there, I already kind of knew, or I already kind of looked up out of my own curiosity.
Hmm.
But yeah, here and there, I definitely had to just go out and find answers on my own. And I think a lot of writers can relate to me when I say it would sometimes just lead me into a deep, dark pit where I just kept researching more and more because it just caught my interest.
Hmm. And was any of it like personal experience? Not like the illegal part, obviously, but the portions that had to do with like, so in the beginning kind of area where he's driving like a taxi, quote unquote. It's very similar, at least in my mind, to what I could imagine like Uber or Lyft would be, because I did Postmates for a while, and it was that kind of like you have your thing on your phone, something comes up, you go and do it, all of that kind of stuff, and the orders just sort of come in. And I was wondering if that is something you've done in the past or did relate to that in some way.
Well, up until very recently, I was actually working a job delivering supplies to local clinics. So I do have a bit of experience of just long work hours in a car. But other than that, yeah, that was just kind of me trying to think of how it worked and make it go as I went along.
And I guess that leads into the next question of, did any of the illegal parts come from personal experience?
No, most of the illegal parts came from the experiences of mobsters who decided to talk about their experiences. And I definitely acknowledged those as well.
Okay, I have to ask, I have to check, just to make positive. We're not cops, but, you know. And then I do have some stuff I was wondering too about like the RWBY franchise in general. Why like you chose it, like what inspired you originally, is like who your favorite characters are. What are you thinking of the series so far, as well as what you're kind of hoping for it, things like that. Getting more into the fan portion of it, all that kind of stuff.
Well, what I think of the series is it definitely captured my imagination when I first saw it. I liked the choreographed fights, I liked the action, I liked the soundtrack, and I was already a Rooster Teeth fan when I first discovered it. So I kind of was just a fan on episode 1.
Yeah.
As for where the series is going, I that's a bit of a loaded question. I've been with enough RWBY fans that they always want to argue over it, and I'm not gonna open that can of worms. But I still like the show. I'm a bit questionable with some of the creative decisions, but you know what? That's every story.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So what do you think of Jean's new look?
Not a fan of it, to be honest.
Okay, that's basically what that whole question boiled down to for me.
All right.
Because I'm pretty sure we used the new model's hair for Jean in our drawing, if I'm not incorrect there, Seabass.
Gonna use that.
Yeah, exactly. They've kind of made it a little too serious now, and
Yeah, the whole show's taken a huge turn into like a more serious spectrum, and it makes sense because of like, you know, the events and stuff that are happening.
Well, yeah, they built up to that, and I mean, I'm not a judge. I dealt with some pretty gritty, serious stuff in my own story, so
yeah,
I get it. But it definitely doesn't have the same charm as it did in the early seasons for it. I can't blame anyone for that, but I can understand why people have lost interest because of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we actually have on staff a fairly big RWBY fan, and one of the people that have convinced me originally to do this story in the first place.
I saw the RWBY one and saw RWBY and Mafia and Gangsters. I was like, yes, this one. This is the one we read.
Wait, when I posted it on Reddit, I thought I was putting a drop in the ocean. I thought, you know what? I could see this working well if it was read aloud, but I'm not expecting anything to happen. So I'm very surprised.
It could still definitely be a lot better. Speaking from personal experience, I'm very, very bad at reading.
Yeah,
So, me being the narrator was probably not a great idea.
we generally have like 3 hours, let's just say, for a 20-minute just story in general. We've had
Well, I think
up
generally
to-
it's 2 hours for like a 15 to 20 minute thing. We normally record 2.5 hours.
Yeah, but for the RWBY ones in particular, those end up dragging on a lot longer. And
What was the first one was like, or I guess it was the second one. It ended up being something like 6 hours or something, wasn't it?
I think it was 5.
5 hours. Yeah, that was rough. I'm sorry.
and it's fine because Sebastian's not the most like he doesn't read things instantly, which is a-okay. I don't think he has to,
I
but
also don't read things out loud.
yeah, going
I
from
also don't talk a whole lot in the first place.
because he's generally played like mostly side characters and all of the other ones I've narrated, and it works out a bit better. But with this one, because of the way that the first chapter was done, we thought we might go a little special with it and have him be the narrator so that I wouldn't have to be the one who does it every single time, and that I could get a chance to play a different character. But now we have these super long recording sessions, and it's not anything interesting. It's always just line mess up.
It's me reading a line probably 14 times in a row until I get the okay from everyone.
Oh man, that sounds like hell.
Oh yeah.
But most of the time, we're all just kind of reading ahead and checking out what's going on later. Just waiting for scenes that are going to happen that are more interesting, to say the least, than like Jean talking about him trying to like drive a car for 20 minutes because we're waiting for him to say he drove the car 20 times. But we've so far read up to the next chapter that is right after the one. Let me make positive on what number that is. Chapter 4 is the one that we have on backlog. But very interesting so far. We've got basically past the point where
There's the club scene with the
two twins,
Their name.
which I got to play one of the twins. I'm super stoked about that. I'm waiting for it to come out now because of that.
I'm so sorry.
But it's very fun so far. The whole of the story is very fun, just the way people are written, the way people are interacting, and honestly, our goal is just to play justice to that, because there's a lot of people who have portrayed how much of a fan they are of the story and have ended up at our channel instead of like the other way around. It's very, you're the door and we're just the person in the room kind of thing. But we had a guy the other day requesting for the upcoming chapters, and it's like, listen, you're probably getting a lot better stuff if you just go to the website and read through it. Like,
I mean, there's so much. This ended up as the longest story I ever wrote, which was not what I was expecting when I started. So,
Yeah, how many chapters is it right now? Or since it's finished?
it's 82 chapters,
Oh, wow.
and at least according to fanfiction.net, I'm over 790 words, 1,000
Oh, wow.
words.
That's crazy.
like 790.
Yeah,
That's crazy.
Yeah, I surpassed War and Peace. I was like, what did I do?
Yep.
I also kind of realized, I guess this is why mobster movies are always so long. Like,
Yeah.
Godfather being 4 hours long makes sense now.
Yep.
There's always so much build up to it, and it's always worth it.
So when did you originally first start like writing it? Like, about how long, I guess, did it take for you to fully realize this whole thing?
Well, 2020, I started a previous RWBY fan fiction called Jean and the Real Girl. And that one I kind of wrote because I wanted to get back into writing fan fiction. I have a whole bunch of fan fictions that I never finished and probably never will finish, if I'm being honest. And I started that, the pandemic hit, I had way more time than I expected to write it out. But as I was in the middle of it, I got the idea for this story. Because I always kind of had the idea of writing a mobster story, but I really didn't know what to do. I just knew I wanted to write a mobster story. And as I was writing that story, which also centered around Jean, shocking, I know, I kind of had the idea that he would be the perfect character to kind of explore the underworld as sort of a fish out of water tale. And then I came up with this idea of him essentially joining the mob to essentially undermine it and having a change of loyalty as time went on. And yeah, I spent the next 6 months essentially planning out a storyline for A Man of Honor as I was writing Jean and the Real Girl. So I was kind of all ready to start this story by the time I finished that.
So did you have an ending in mind before you started writing it then?
Yeah, I kind of knew how I wanted the story to more or less end before I ever actually started typing it out, which I think definitely helped me compared to some of my other stories where I kind of was just shooting from the hip and going with the flow, which was nice, but like I actually had a real plan this time, and I think it paid off.
Yeah. I'm looking at the page currently with all of your stories, your 12 stories. Is there any of these you want to take a second to give mention to?
Of my other stories, you know, I really can't say I do. I like a lot of these old stories, but I feel like it's a bit of a writer's curse to kind of look back at my old work and go, ugh, I wrote that.
But we did really so far enjoy it and are planning on completing more and more of it. I'm not too sure how far we'll be able to get into it just with how many chapters there are, as well as for us, honestly, the point is for people to be introduced to these authors and their works. It's not really for us to be a sort of like, I guess, proxy in a way, you know? The whole point is more for people to be introduced to these works of fiction and then continue on with the writer.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I mean, I always kind of felt that there needed to be more respectable avenues for people to be introduced to fan fiction, because I mean, it has a lot of negative connotations around it, which is a shame in my opinion.
That's
Definitely.
really where we kind of are.
We have a very similar standpoint.
Because originally, a lot of this channel was going to be kind of like a joke, is why it was going to start. But I started falling in love with the community and just sort of like the amount of work people put into these. And I don't think that it's fair to criticize something based solely off of what it's about. because that's not what writing is. And just seeing how much effort people are putting into some of these, as well as just like how, because it's basically just for fun. I feel like it is probably one of the most pure forms of fiction is fan fiction, because it's purely from that space of I like this and I want to share it with somebody else. And I think it's very trashy to like jump on that and like make fun of people for it. And that's kind of where we ended up changing and ending up going a lot more positive with it.
I don't know who gave me this example, but they kind of said that defining fanfiction is hard because the more you look back, you can count many actually classic works as fan fiction. Like the one that was given to me as the clearest example was the Divine Comedy by Dante, in which it's religious fan fiction where he travels through hell with his favorite philosophers. He's a self-insert. That's
I could see this.
That's a good way to look at that. I never thought about it that way.
And I guess I'm curious, do you have a favorite fan fiction? Or at least like one that you're like currently following that you've kind of been keeping an eye on?
I actually haven't read that much fan fiction of late, if I'm going to be perfectly honest. A lot of the works by Cor Alaran are very, very popular, and I liked many of them. Some others, not so much. If I were to say a favorite fan fiction, that's a hard one. Yeah, I don't know. I'm tough with these questions off the top of my head.
No, I completely get that. It's something that's not super easy to just pick and choose, especially when there's a lot of stuff that's very new, fun, and suddenly you're interested in something new, and then it's not. It's a lot of like up in the air, and I completely get that. It was just more of like a is there kind of thing.
Right.
Do you have like a literary work that has been a big like inspiration for you in any way, like a book or like a poem of sorts, or something that you kind of like looked to when writing stuff yourself?
Well, there's a lot of things I read that I think have influenced me. For a man of honor, I definitely say the biggest influence personally was the book Wise Guy. Which, if you don't know, is the very book that they based the movie Goodfellas around. It's all about Henry Hill and how he literally joined the Lucchese crime family as an associate and eventually turned snitch on all of them. And that way, the way it was always told, with him essentially talking to the reader and explaining himself, I definitely took that for a man of honor. I wanted that.
That makes sense. I was actually going to ask about the reasoning of having it being told in this sort of like omniscient person who knows everything that happened, then saying it to Saffron.
Yep.
And then why that was. But that does make sense. I'm actually looking at it right now. It's a 1985 nonfiction book by crime reporter Nicholas Pileggi that chronicles the life of Henry Hill. Huh. That's really cool.
Yeah, it's a great read. If you've ever seen Goodfellas, a lot of the things will just pop right out.
Dang. That's actually cool, because that is very similar to the way that this is told.
Yeah, I always kind of knew I wanted a first-person perspective. I kind of felt it would give things a bit of a noir-style feel. And I kind of wanted to emulate film noir, which is why I was so stoked when I actually watched the first video, and I don't know, the neon, the way you did the visuals of the city and everything else. Like, I felt like you captured the tone perfectly.
Yeah, we were going for a very specific feel because I was trying to find jazz music, and it just fit, as well as like our kind of vibe, I guess is the best way to put it, is neon lights. So it worked out perfect for us in the way that we could portray it, as well as it very well like reinforced that whole thing, and it gave us a first time to be able to do like something out of what we were doing originally, which was just like text on the
just
screen.
kind of reading, yeah, with some names popping up. Like, it was nicer to have a little teeny tiny bit of a soundscape and then have some visuals to go with it.
Yeah, because I don't think the visuals were even an original like thing, but then Sebastian was the one who kind of started doing it out of nowhere, just bringing it up, and he's like, hey, I started drawing these and we should put them in, and that's what we ended up doing.
Well, I think we discussed it prior, because we had talked about how in the Beastars one we were using just the names, but they were like, you know, neon lights basically. We had talked about maybe trying to make it more interesting and having like an outline of a character or something like that. And I think we were originally talking about doing that for Beastars, and then we just ended up applying it to a Man of Honor, and I think it fit really well, in my opinion.
Because my idea was like completely different. What I was gonna do originally was have like this neon light fill the entire screen instead. And then I think you brought to me the drawings, and I was like, that's not what I was thinking at all. But no, I feel like Sebastian so far has been the one who's like had the most impact on it, because he edited the first one, and he's the one who kind of set that whole thing up. And then I did the next two, and then he's now the one who's in charge of the rest of them
one
at this point, because they're a lot of work. It is a very work heavy thing, but it does come out really good once it's all finished up. It just takes time to make sure that it's all good, especially with like
a slacker.
Last one we posted. I spent such a long time finding images and then color grading them and making them fit in a way that was cohesive. Shockingly, it's hard to find like certain things. I was trying to find the School of Beacon, like a good picture of it, and I think I found a 3D model.
Really anything.
And that's about it.
You found like it looked like it was kind of a screenshot from like one of the first episodes where Beacon is shown. So it's like it looks a little janky, but you know, after you color graded it and changed and tweaked it, like it worked out well.
Yeah.
And I guess I don't think we ended up answering this, but who is your favorite characters in RWBY?
Favorite characters. I'd have to probably say my favorite character, aside from Jean, would probably be Blake or Roman.
I do like Roman.
I think Roman's cool.
He was a pretty good bad guy.
He just
there's kind of a reason why I needed to make him a big boss in my story and kind of revolve it around him a bit, even if he's not the central character.
I feel like they did my guy dirty. He was like one season and then he's gone. It's like, bro.
I know. We wanted so much more from him.
Yeah.
Like I'm all
and I think
down
part
for
of that
the like Neapolitan arcs, but like my man was cool. He was sassy. He had class.
Yes, he did. And I keep wondering how much he could have kept contributing to the story if they had just given him the chance, but we'll never know.
And then sorry,
I have to ask because I don't remember. Before Monty passed, had they already taken out Torchwick, or was he still a character before he passed? I don't remember.
I believe Monty passed between seasons 2 and 3.
Mm-hmm.
So they might have already worked on that.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of hard. It's kind of really hard to tell. There's no clear answers there.
Yeah.
I feel, and what he wanted for the show is something we could debate endlessly with no real answers.
Oh yeah.
We're not here to put any stakes in the mud. Like,
Yeah.
there's no hill here that we're necessarily needing to die on, guys. Is there anything in the story that you wish you told in a different way, or that you portrayed in a different way, that just kind of rubbed you wrong on how you did it, or that you wish you could go back and kind of like smooth it out a bit?
There's so many things I wish I could have actually smoothed out in this story. Mainly, it would have come down to just having more time to add things in. I wish I spent more time focusing on Blake and her story arc in the story. I said before in some of my author notes, I kind of wanted to include Sun as a character in this story, and I just never really found the time or a way to, put him in without it just seeming unnatural. I kind of wish I spent a bit more time focusing on Junior and, the Mistrelli clans and all that stuff. There's just so much I wanted to spend more time on, but a story needs to move, so you don't get stuck just world building.
Yeah, sometimes you just gotta take the leap and be like, all right, it's good enough. It works.
Exactly.
Nah.
I feel like that can be an issue that a lot of people who are trying to come up with stories or even write worlds for D&D and stuff, I feel like that's something that a lot of people always kind of think they have to do, is put so much thought into every little detail instead of, letting it grow progressively as you get further into the story. I know that I had a D&D party, not to bring us into D&D, but it relates.
A D&D, so
yeah, we had a DM who spent days and days setting up this world, and he had a map drawn out. He had, I think it was like 70 different cultures. He had his own pantheon of like 20 different gods or something that he had hand selected and stuff. And he went so far into detail on doing all of this stuff, and we ended up only playing like 5 sessions, and it was unfortunate because he did have like a really nicely flushed out world, but you don't necessarily need to go that far when you don't know, how often you're actually going to interact with every little thing like that.
Well, exactly. It's you still need a story to go with the world. It's a balance of that, and I've been in Dungeons and Dragons games like that myself too. I have a friend who will talk my ear off about his world, and we've played multiple games, but it's like I kind of want to focus more about where our characters are at right at this moment.
Yeah,
I feel like it's so easy to bog something down with information. You've got to sit down and say, this is what's important. This is the important parts of this. We'll focus on this. Because there's a lot of times where it's so easy to get sidetracked. So easy to have like everything get muddled. Just because you've got idea after idea. At one point you've got to just say, this is where I'm going. This is good.
That's one of the pitfalls when you do research for a story sometimes, is you find out all these cool things, and sometimes you want to include all those details you read about, but yeah, then it slows everything to a halt as you're essentially trying to explain every little tiny moving component and how it works.
Yeah, and when it comes to like story writing in this vein of thought, it's hard to not accidentally chain yourself down by having so many specific thoughts and like these different little details. Sometimes you're just basically laying out a labyrinth for yourself instead of giving yourself a clear and concise open ending and then finding the path there as you go.
Exactly.
Because for me, and I bringing it back to D&D, I run a group. You're talking to two of them that play it. I do get bogged down so easily with trying to throw things in that I just get so caught up on. And at the end of the day, like I said, you just gotta ask yourself, why? Why are we doing this? Why is this important? And I guess for storytelling as a whole, you kind of have to ask yourself at the end of it of like, well, why? Why is this here, basically? Why am I saying this part? Why am I mentioning that this person's here? What's the importance of this scene? And you could get very heavily into the whole of like writing in general, which I'm 100% down to do, but at the end of the day, the biggest takeaway is just that it is very, very easy to lose yourself in the sauce, if you will, of just trying to make the story.
It kind of reminds me of it's like Chekhov's gun, I believe, where it's like if you write something into the story, it needs to be something, or it should be something that comes into play later. Whereas if you're going into all of these different little details, you're not going to use every single one of those at any given point. So you don't need to write in all these different things if they're not relevant to the main story, to the main plot that you are trying to, get your readers, get your players through.
Exactly. And I mean, there's some give and take there. Sometimes those details just add flavor.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
what you're trying to tell.
Yeah,
but
they still have a point at that stage is kind of the thing I'm getting to, because like even if it's just for fun, even if it's just like fan servicey, or if it's like it would be nice if my players walked in and like owned a Wendy's or something like that. It's as long as it has a purpose and what it does, I feel like that's when it's a-okay to have whatever you want. It's when it starts to have that spot of like, I don't know why we're doing this, or is anybody here needing to know this?
Yeah, well, like, one thing I definitely wanted to do and make believable as I wrote A Man of Honor is I kind of did want to get a little bit into the details of how Jean and the mobs were making money, because I've seen some other gangster films where they're very vague on that detail. They're just like, we wear suits and we sit around tables and act all serious and we do crime, vague crime.
Yeah.
We do implied crime.
Exactly. And I'm like, okay, I want to actually give an answer of what they're doing.
Oh, definitely. No, I feel like it does add, though, to the story for him. Like, there is a difference between world building and then trying to tell the story part of it. You know what I mean? Because the world building is just setting up where it's at, what's going on, who's there. Why is this important? Well, like, because this character's in it, and this is what they need to do, and this is what they're seeing, and so it makes complete sense. I don't want it to seem like I'm saying your story at all had anything that was like,
Oh no, I never got that impression. I was just thinking of something where I included a lot of, details and how it could maybe stand out and my thoughts on it.
Okay. Yeah, I wanted to make sure you didn't feel like we were saying that about your story. No, not at all. When we were reading through it, in fact, I did feel like it was very human, the way he was living his life day to day. Sitting down, watching that one joke name that I forget. Where is it? He's watching this one actor.
Oh, Spruce Willis.
Yeah, Spruce Willis.
Yeah.
I forgot about that one.
He's someone from the show, so
I know, that name haunts me. I think about it actively all the time. But it's very human, and it made me attached to Jean a lot more. Is just hearing him living his day-to-day life. And that's also where I got the original question of, did personal experiences help you write this out? Were you that kid who was sitting there poor, not having anything, having to live off of like cup of ramen kind of stuff? Or were you that Uber driver who had a bunch of really weird people that you just worked with that would appear every once in a while? Like that.
Yeah. Well, I've been that Uber driver. I have lived in a shoebox apartment. And lived not off of ramen, but mostly Hot Pockets for a good number of my bachelor years.
That's fair.
But again, a part of this, I just lifted from Wise Guy, because one of the things that especially stood out to me in that story is Henry Hill describes growing up poor, and he grew up in a mixed Italian-Irish neighborhood. His father was Irish, his mother was Italian. His father worked a construction job for a union. He had like 6 siblings, and yeah, they barely had, a dime to their name. But right across the street was a cab stand where gangsters would hang out. And he eventually, at 11, got a job there, and he was making more money than his adult father as essentially a little kid.
Yeah.
It was wild to think about, and it kind of made me empathize with the character. It made me see, yeah, if I grew up in that situation, I would want to be a criminal, because it seemed like working the honest life was getting no one anywhere.
Yeah.
Was there anywhere that was hard for you to write? Like, just, you didn't have that viewpoint, or just, it was difficult to, like, show it specifically what you were trying to say, or that, like, just a scene was difficult because of what was in the scene?
Oh, a hard scene to write. I think the most difficult for me when it came to writing was in the second act. I write torture. And it's something that I wanted to be very, very careful with, because I wanted to portray that suffering, but I didn't want to linger on it too much. I didn't want to have it completely tear down the story and make it 100% depressing like it very easily could. But I wanted to make it feel still very real and impactful, and not just something that happens and, next scene they're all over it. So I think that was the hardest part for me, and I still don't really know if I did it justice. I just did the best I could with it.
I definitely could see how something like that is very difficult to write. I feel like there's not a lot of, like, experience you can go off of once it gets to that extreme of a topic. You know what I mean?
Yes.
You can't really write from a perspective that's almost impossible for you to imagine. You know what I mean? Because, like, I think very few of us have been tortured in any way, or, like, stabbed in the chest, or, you know what I mean? Like, there's a lot that
you
makes
can't.
it difficult.
Yeah, I mean, the best I could do was just, hey, what do they recommend people going through Sears school to do? And that was about it. Like,
yeah, and trying to make sure that it doesn't feel like that it's there just for, like, shock value, of course, as well. I feel like would be a little bit hard to make sure it actually means something, rather than, oh, look what I can write here, look what I can, look how far I can go, I guess.
Exactly. And some of that stuff is kind of why I liked the idea of making the prologue with Saffron, because it was kind of my way to tell the audience, listen, a lot of bad stuff is going to happen, but it will be okay.
Yeah.
Just Have faith.
I mean, it also sets a pretty different feeling when he's like telling his sister this, like, this torture happened. Just, I'm letting you know, straight up, this torture happened. And the Saffron's like, I just have to accept hearing that from you. This is nice.
Well, in the story, she eventually stops him and just couldn't listen to it anymore.
Yeah, that's exactly where I could see something like that going. That is a very realistic response to a perspective-based story.
Yeah, like I definitely took my moments to get out of the story, go back to Jean and Saffron, have them talk, and since you haven't gotten there and probably never will, but yeah, I even use it to kind of change perspectives in different narrators. I have one chapter where it's Cardin narrating his experience. And it's all about him actually trying to save Jean while he's, being tortured and all that stuff. And it's meant to highlight how much they've grown and gotten past their differences, and how in many ways he's, the crueler counterpart to Jean, but sometimes that's actually a good thing in this life.
Yeah.
And I do it again later with Neo, which was very, very fun to write, because writing a mute, trying to explain their experiences through the world, was not something I expected myself ever writing, but it was definitely fun.
I can imagine. We do have plans, I know, of at least getting fairly far into it. I just don't know how far we'll get, because this is one of those stories for us especially that has been like a fairly big driving point for the channel so far. It's been one of our continued series. It's also like one of the more important ones that have hit us like the beginning of like our channel, that basically kind of helped show where we're at. And I truly do want to see the ending of this story personally, because I'm probably going to read along to see, even if we don't end up finishing it, but I would love to return back and talk again at a later date, if and after we've posted more, to kind of be like, hey, well, this is insane, this part of the story was crazy.
However far you get, I'm just happy you actually gave my story a chance, because like I said, I thought it was just going to be a drop in the ocean, because I saw it like when you posted on the fanfiction subreddit, like everyone was dropping their stories, and I was just like, man, there's got to be a lot of really good ones here. They probably already have their roster up, but I'll just try my luck.
I think, to be fair, I believe, Connor, you pulled like most of the stories that people put in there. I think you took and made a list of like most of them, right?
I have it somewhere. I still need to update the list, because we got more and more requests, and my thing is, I feel so bad because I know we're not going to be able to get to all of those realistically. It's just impossible. Yeah. Plus, there's a lot of them there that like broach on topics that isn't the most comfortable for like us to read,
Yeah.
Yeah. Especially for a YouTube channel, it's...
Yeah.
And it's not that like...
Yeah, there was a few stories we had to definitely choose to not read if we wanted to keep our YouTube channel.
Yeah.
And it's a lot of characters in it too.
Usually one of us...
minors especially, and we don't want to portray them in a way that's weird. And it comes from kids who have been writing these fan fictions who are minors. So I completely get it. Yep. And they're writing from their perspective, but like as an adult, it's not the most comfortable to really go that far into like this romantic relationship between like two 13-year-old characters, It's very it's a fine line.
It is a fine line. And I mean, in a way, that is one of the things that you can appreciate about fan fiction, is that since it's, fan media, they're not, under the same constraints as, stuff that usually gets published or made into film, but that also means you're also free to go into very uncomfortable territory. So,
definitely.
It's a good.
Yeah, it's one of those where there's not a lot of like moderation, quote unquote, on it, but that does let gems leak through that you wouldn't get having this whole entire team of people being like, well, is this realistic? Because that's not what matters. It's for fun. And everybody's like, this is a cool idea. But also on the same line, it is one of those things where it could go a very weird direction, and you're just like, all right, I don't know if you know about My Immortal, but yeah, so My Immortal is a fan fiction that I don't think we know who the author is.
No one knows who it is.
But it revolves around Harry Potter universe, and it makes a lot of light on like self-harm, things like that. And I personally don't feel comfortable like doing it because it's a very like jokey kind of thing for people to read. So you're like, oh, we'll read it because it'd be fun. It's something a lot of people read, but I don't feel comfortable with that kind of stuff. And it's like, because you can take things very specific ways, and that one just did take it in a very like non-serious manner, and that's where it's like we got to be careful on what we put, because I feel like if we're showing this to other people, we should put our best foot forward of like, this is not okay to do this way.
Well, exactly. And I mean, I even struggled with, what's appropriate and what's not. I mean, as much as I like my gangster shows and dramas, I kind of felt weird making a story where they're essentially the good guys, when I know for a fact that the reality is far, far from that.
Yeah. I mean, the same could be said of like Pirates was an example.
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of what I thought eventually. It's like, we do it with Pirates, we do it with, outlaws in the Old West. We all kind of have our favorite type of bad guy or Robin Hood that we like to occasionally idolize, whether or not it's right.
Yeah, I don't think it's indicative of your character to write about a character that's not good. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, and that's sometimes one of the most interesting things with writing new characters is sometimes you kind of got to realize you need to give up your sense of morality and think about what their sense of morality is, because it could be wildly different from yours.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I feel like writing perspective, just as a writer, is probably one of the best skills to have. It doesn't matter if you're like the best writer ever and the skill level of what words you're using, your diction's insane. Like, it doesn't matter. What matters is that person who can accurately like portray somebody that's not them in that way that showcases them being an amazing writer. And that comes from being able to lose your sense of self as you're writing, because there's a lot of writers that their writing is so closely tied with their personal psyche that it is very difficult to suddenly ask yourself to lose that.
Yeah, well, and that's one of the things I discovered I really liked writing in the first person perspective, because this is the first story I ever decided to do that, and it was very immersive to write Jean, to write Cardin, to write Neo, as if I was in their skin, trying to just recall these details. And it definitely let me kind of get a feel for them a lot better than if I was just from the outside looking in.
Yeah, it's one of the more interesting parts about just fiction and storytelling for me personally. It's just that kind of disconnect between what is a character, how the character is interacting with the world, what's this perspective, all of that's kind of what has always drawn me in, and I think it's fascinating to write a character just in general.
Right. Character. Well, and that's one of the things that can be, I think, especially fun with fan fiction in specific, is I do kind of like taking these other characters like Jean and kind of analyzing them and going, okay, what makes this character tick? What makes this character? So how can I put them through experiences that are going to inevitably change them, but still keep their core together so that they're still recognizable to the reader?
Oh, definitely. And I feel like it's a very fine line, but the line is very hard to find.
Yes, it can be very, very hard to find because, I mean, that's what people really are. They're all made from their experiences and they're constantly changing from their experiences. So you put a well-known character through things that they haven't gone through in the regular medium, it's going to change who they are. No ifs, ands, or buts about it, but you need to also be careful and realize they're not all going to change at once. You need to keep some familiar concepts with them. And if you're going to get rid of those, just draw them out slowly.
Yeah. And I think that's cool with fan fiction because you do have these characters that already exist and you're understanding them to that extreme of seeing what fundamentally makes up this character. Because I feel like out of anybody in this room, you would understand on a fundamental level who Jean is more than any of us. And that's fascinating because even though we're both watching and enjoying this show, you do have that insight. And it's not even like a real insight, but it feels as if you know this character as if they were a friend. And I think that is such a cool, like, the connection, just that whole concept therein of these characters and how they start to portray these real emotions, even though they're not real. It's really cool.
Well, thank you.
And I gotta say, so far, like, the way you talk about the experiences of writing this, as well as like just all of that kind of stuff in general, is stuff that personally I do agree with and I think is fascinating. And that's kind of what the crux of the whole meeting the author thing was, is for us to kind of get more into it. So I do appreciate you going over like all of this stuff with us. It's very fascinating.
Well, I'm very happy to be here. I do love to talk about writing, and so honestly asking me to come and answer a bunch of questions about it is like, oh, goody, I get to talk about myself, one of my favorite subjects.
Oh, definitely. Do you have like anything about like just RWBY in general that you kind of want to talk about? Anything that's like stood out to you as scenes that have been like the most impactful, or like the way certain characters have interacted that have kind of helped you shape that kind of Jean character, or seeing the way that Jean himself in the show has interacted with certain things that were kind of big focal points for you with that character?
My big focal points for Jean, I think it kind of goes a lot into the first season. And there's that familiar scene in Forest of Forever Fall. Cardin's trying to bully him into hurting Kira, and he takes that moment to stand up to him, essentially helping to prove that he's first and foremost loyal to his friends. And that's definitely one of the aspects I wanted to focus on in this story, is that he is loyal, and that loyalty is going to be one of his biggest strengths.
Yeah.
Because he's entering into a world where people are backstabbing each other all the time. So you need real friends. And Jean isn't the most capable character, and that's kind of the fun of this, is that he gets to surround himself with capable people. And that's how he manages to make it through. The other, I guess, for Jean, I'd say would be during the exam, when they show him as a strategist, trying to take down that Death Stalker, and he's eventually issuing suggestions and orders and taking the role of leadership. And that's kind of what else made me realize that he'd kind of be perfect for this story, for this starting from the bottom, working his way up, because he does have all those leadership traits that don't necessarily go into purely strength or fighting capability. He would be the one to actually take on a Machiavellian mindset if he was forced to. So that's kind of how I connected him in this story.
And I mean, that is something that is shown throughout the rest of the series too. It's like, these are truths that hold true to him and his character and his growth. Like, these are very prevalent characteristics of him. So I
exactly.
can see how this is brought in.
Yep. And I do like the idea that kindness is not necessarily weakness, but a strength. So I wanted to tried to focus on that several times in the story. But I also don't think Jean is quite a saint as some writers like to make him out to be. So I always tried to keep an element of selfishness in there as well, and honestly show that sometimes kindness can be calculated.
Yeah, and I think that helps to show that he's more human, and it's a little bit more relatable that way as well.
Exactly.
Yeah, because sometimes characters just aren't good all the time. And they're...
No. Well, I mean, Jean faking his way into Beacon, I felt like was the ultimate example of this. Like, yeah. It's not... He kind of did it for his own pride and nothing more.
Yeah.
Yeah, he does have characteristics of being conceited in ways, or as well just being this person who is kind of masterminding all certain things that are happening. Not to say he's like this like genius or something, but he does have that streak of lying.
Well, yeah, and I feel like I tried to have plenty of moments in the story where he kind of thinks about what is the best thing for him in a certain scenario, and it's kind of cold and calculated, and he actually hates himself for thinking that way. But he still thought that way, and it kind of shows that he can be bad when he needs to be. That's how I wanted to look at it.
Yeah. So you don't have to go into too much detail, but you did say you had kind of like wanted to start going into original stories. Do you have specific characters that you've kind of started to write out, and do you want to kind of go into those at all, or?
I don't have specific characters. I have a few vague concepts. Honestly, more I've just overall thought about world building more than anything else at the moment.
Oh yeah, definitely. No, I didn't know if it was like how fleshed out anything was, so I was kind of curious as to if you had anything you wanted to talk
everything's
about with it.
Yeah, everything's right at the rough stage. I sort of have a vague idea of what I kind of would like to write and a vague idea of what I would like as a setting. And I can go into that. I'm kind of wanting to, inspired by this recent work, I am kind of wanting to write a noir style fiction, kind of like your classic hard-boiled detective stories.
Oh.
But I'm kind of wanting to do it in a fantasy style Renaissance Venice. That's the idea I've kind of hooked onto, and I can't get it out of my head. And I don't have a lot of other ideas than that, but I'm slowly working out things.
Oh, I get that.
Yeah, that'd be very interesting to see.
And honestly, we'll probably follow you into your new works as well, so you can expect probably a video of that first one. Just speaking honest here, just because your work is very fun. Like I said, like it is very diverse in the way that the characters are interacting with each other, and like you do have very likable characters. Like the old lady that Cody voices, just I'm sitting here trying to believe like she's a sweetheart. I know she is, as we're just reading through this. And like I don't think she's said like one nice thing so far. But I want to believe. I'm like, there's no way. She's so nice. She's so likable. She's got to be a good person. And then she's sitting there like the kind of person who would put out a cigarette on Jean. Like but I have a lot of fun personally reading through these. So if you would allow it, once you do start releasing other things, we probably will start doing some of those as well. Because,
well, if I get around to writing it, I'd be happy to. You guys flatter me so much just by giving me the time of day, so I'd be thrilled to do something involving that if I ever get to writing it.
I mean, honestly, when it comes to this stuff, for us, it is a lot of like whatever works for the author, and it's work that I guess like we do as like a passion project. We've had a lot of people like kind of be like, hey, we're super appreciative of all this work you did and stuff like that, and it's like we didn't really do a whole lot. It was
honestly
mostly you.
Half
You
the
did
time,
the work.
Half the time it's like we just find a story that someone has given us the opportunity to like look into, and then we just sit on the couch in the living room, shoot the shit, read a couple lines, hang out for the most part for a couple hours, and then it's like we didn't really do a whole lot. Everything came from you, the author. Well, and then also Connor when he edits, he does some insane stuff.
Well, you're doing something I have absolutely no skill in. So I guess for me and a lot of people who are not very tech savvy, it seems like so much to us. And I mean, I don't know, the visuals you have put on to the videos of my chapters, I'm always blown away.
Well, we appreciate it.
Yeah, we're very proud of what we put out with just in general, but with your story, it's exciting because we feel that it's very unique.
Yeah, and I guess my point is like I just don't want like people to forget that they're the writers. They're the ones who came up with this amazing story. Most of the time, like, we're getting these thanks, and it's like it feels undeserved. Like this is all your work kind of thing, where it's like listen, I just slapped this into an editing program with some of these, but then there's the ones that I do like hours and hours of editing on, and even still, it's like you probably spent nights and nights and nights writing this out. There's some of these with chapters that go into like the hundreds, and I feel like a very small piece of that. And I just don't want the viewers to ever forget that the most important part is the authors. And that's why we're so prevalent on like giving people their right amount of credit. They're the first thing we're saying in it. We're like, we're Fanix Fiction. Today we're reading the story by this person. they're put up on screen. We have it in the description. We have it always in the actual thumbnail because we want to make sure that it's very apparent who's writing this. Stuff like that. Like, it is very important to us.
Yeah, well, again, it made me feel very, very special when you approached me on Reddit and asked if you could do the chapter, and I was just like, what? So, you know what? It's give and take, because I mean, there's definitely nights where I was just burning the midnight oil trying to make a new chapter, but you know, a lot of times I only just kept going forward because I kept getting more and more reviews or personal messages from people who were just so excited about the next chapter. They just wanted to come out, and I do write fan fiction for myself first and foremost, but
I feel like
that was definitely the motivation I needed to say, okay, I'm going to see this through to the end, because sometimes I wasn't always feeling it.
I don't think it's necessary to have like people view stuff you make, right? But you can't tell me that it's not nice when somebody says, hey, this is pretty good. That's just a lie.
Well, exactly. And I don't need that, but I mean, this was a labor of love, and to realize other people loved it made the labor a lot lighter, I guess I would say.
Oh, definitely. I completely get that. There is a lot of people that I talk to, and they're like, well, why don't you just do it because, like, you want to? And I'm like, well, obviously I do want to, but, like, I am spending 24 hours here trying to figure out 3D animation for a 2-second scene. Like, there's a point to this. So I'm completely with that mindset. But that's why I really want people to see the authors for who they are. And that's kind of, like I said, the biggest reason for the Meet the Author series is so that we can get more into the nitty-gritty of who these people are and what makes them tick and what's important to them and why, and just to get a deeper understanding. That way it's a lot more personal when it comes down to it on what's actually going on, because you've filled out for me like a man of honor, like what it kind of stands for in a way, and like who's behind it and why it exists and stuff like that, in a way that I don't think I honestly could have if I just read it. You know what I mean?
Well, I'm happy to again just kind of talk about myself and let other people know me.
And
so when did you first start writing? Like, it doesn't have to be fan fiction specifically, but like what in your life, I guess, when did you kind of get that writing bug?
There were some points in elementary school where I definitely tried writing, but it never got very far, only a few pages.
Mm-hmm.
I think I would honestly say it kind of did start with fan fiction, namely a Naruto fan fiction I did way back in the day.
Let's go.
Hell yeah.
Then that kind of led me to try writing an original work based on one of my first Dungeons and Dragons games.
Oh, cool.
And I kind of wrote that out, kind of realized as I was going through it, I'm like, oh man, I can do way better than this. I'm going to scrap the story and start all over again, which
yeah.
I think that's something every author goes through. They kind of just look back at their old work and they realize they've matured, and that's just part of being a writer.
Definitely.
Oh, for sure.
I get that 100%.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then it just kind of led to me doing fan fictions here and there. And usually it kind of goes through a process where I find a fandom I decide I want more, so I turn to fan fiction. And then I want something very specific from the fan fiction, and no one's written it, so I kind of realize I need to write it myself, and that's how it progresses.
You're literally that meme of, all right, I'll do it myself, and then like you're the one bearing the cross.
Exactly. I mean, that's honestly, that's kind of where most of my shipping comes from. Is I just realize, there's not a lot of this, and I kind of want more, or what's been written just isn't doing it for me. So I'm just gonna have to kind of give my own work and thoughts towards it. And
just reading some of them, and you're like, this isn't even noir enough. I gotta do this myself.
There was a few Ruby Crime fan fictions I tried reading, and I was just like, nope. It doesn't feel like The Godfather enough. That's what I need.
There's not enough Tommy guns. Where's all the actual crime? This is ridiculous. I'm gonna write my own and send it to them as a comment, cause this is dumb. No, I get you completely. I'm right there, man.
About how old would you say you probably were when you started getting into fan fiction?
When I started getting into fan fiction, as in reading it, I'd probably say I was around 13 to 14.
Gotcha.
My older sister wrote some fan fiction that I enjoyed, and she kind of turned me on to the whole concept, and that was kind of back in the early days when, Harry Potter fan fiction had their own websites, and
yep,
where everything was on, fanfiction.net or Archive of Our Own or Wattpad.
Yep. Fanfiction.net seems like it's, from what I've heard, kind of gone downhill a bit.
Yeah, though it's definitely where I get the most attention, so I guess I'm kind of not in that camp personally, but I understand that it's very antiquated in how it's set up.
Yeah.
And
it feels like gears turning anytime you load a page.
Yeah. Writing fanfiction, I think I was actually around 16, 17.
Okay.
Yep. And I'm 30 now for context, so.
Gotcha. Been at it for a while then.
Yeah.
So, from what I've seen, there's been a few people that have helped you with this whole story.
Yes.
There's specifically a comment we got on episode 3 where they say that they are a friend of yours and actually was an editor for the chapter that we did. And I just wanted to know if there's any honorable mentions you wanted to make about the people.
The biggest one on fanfiction is Darkness Rules. He kind of messaged me back when I was first doing Jean and the Real Girl. And he kind of became the first real person I told about this idea. And then I just sort of started bouncing all the ideas I had off of him and getting his input. And he kept on it throughout the entire writing of this fan fiction. And I definitely want to give him credit because I think if I didn't have him or someone like him, I probably would have burnt out on this idea. He helped me keep the interest up the whole time. And there were others like him, but he was definitely the most consistent one.
Oh, that's awesome. So are you guys friends now? Like, just outside of this kind of work? Like, do you guys know each other just in, like, real life?
We haven't met each other in real life. I actually believe we're on opposite ends of the country, so...
Gotcha.
There's probably little chance of us meeting face to face, and to be honest, we haven't actually gone that far out of talking on fanfiction.net. But I mean, that's over 2 years of just shooting the shit about a story, so that counts for something, I'd say.
Definitely, I would say it does. That's actually really cool, because my favorite part about some of this is like that connecting with people, and like seeing these groups kind of forming of like fandoms, right? And that's what's awesome about it, and just seeing how people are like interacting with them. Like we kind of broached it with Patella about like the Beastars fandom for him and how open everybody was, and a few authors that he started just talking to and becoming friends with, and how when we first started jumping into this, we got welcomed in with like open arms. And I think it's really sweet like community, and that is a big reason we ended up changing kind of like how the channel was gonna go, from being like this kind of like jokey thing to suddenly we're like, oh, we're actually serious.
Yeah, well, the fanfiction community as a whole, I mean, I do feel like that there's a connection that writers and other artists of all sorts kind of have with each other, because we all kind of get that we're happy to put work in for our visions, whether it's someone playing guitar and, you know, getting calluses on their fingers, to someone staying up way late because they have that perfect idea in their head and they just need to get it out on paper before they lose it and go to sleep. I feel like it's the little bit of suffering that we go through that kind of binds us together and makes us want to be friends.
Yeah, and I think with all mediums of art, it's so insanely helpful to have somebody to bounce things off of, whether it be somebody who's helping you with it or just somebody interacting with it and just kind of putting that input out there.
It's very easy to burn out on something you're trying to create if you're in your own head and the only person looking at something.
Exactly, and that's part of why a lot of my old fan fictions eventually died out. It was just me. I wasn't really even sharing it with some of my friends who mostly aren't a lot of fan fiction readers in general, or just weren't into the fandoms I was into. Mm-hmm. And it was all just sort of in my head, and I eventually lost interest with those works, or other, you know, outside influences just made it too hard for me to keep going. But in this case, I had Darkness Rules 1, I had Firefly 25, I had Big Brain 411, I had all these people who always just kind of wanted to talk about it and wanted to hear some ideas, or had some ideas of their own, which, yeah, plenty did actually. So it kept my enthusiasm up at all times, and this is the result.
That's actually pretty awesome. It's nice to be able to finish something like you did, and I bet look back on it all and see like the people who've helped you get to that point, as well as like just having it under your belt now, of having this 2-year-long project.
Yeah.
And you don't have to answer, but does your significant other, have they read your story?
No. She's not as much of a RWBY fan, and my wife has never actually been that big into fan fiction in general. It's just never really appealed to her that much, and that's okay. It's just kind of my hobby.
Okay.
She has linked to your videos, though.
She has. So.
Yeah, I completely get where you're coming from, because we record this. We're pretty passionate about, us with this YouTube channel and with reading fan fictions, and we're starting to get really into fan fiction and the community and everything. But my partner not really into it so much. But like you said, it's like it's just my little hobby that I can do over here while she does whatever she does.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, a big portion of my writing time was just sort of our, own moments where we were going off and doing our own things, in the household, which I think is actually pretty healthy, just to, be apart and then, come back together and enjoy things together.
I agree.
So is writing like a focus of yours, or what kind of work do you do, if you don't mind me asking?
What do you mean exactly by focus?
Like just in life kind of thing, because there's a lot of people who focus on like their careers and they're trying to make said things into careers, or focus on like more artistic approaches to stuff. I just kind of want to know a bit more about you personally, I guess.
I understand. Right now, making writing a more serious thing for me is definitely something I have considered. I have actually talked to some people who wanted to commission fan fictions, and so I was thinking, yeah, maybe I'll do that as sort of a side gig, make some extra money. That'll be good.
I didn't know that was something people did.
Yeah, and I might still do that. I've also thought of, if I do make an original work, I'll definitely start talking to some publishers and see what I can do with that. So it's definitely something I've thought about, but it's not my career. Right now, it's still my hobby, and I'm happy to have it as a hobby.
Yeah, no, I mean that's completely fair. Honestly, it's something that would be a very risky maneuver to make suddenly into a career. It is a very back burner kind of thing. So have you talked with like publishing, things like that, like kind of looked into that kind of stuff? Like what really would you have to go through to get something like that done?
I've looked into it a little bit. I would essentially send various publishing companies my drafts, or I could do, as some people call it, vanity publishing, where I essentially put up money for a company to publish it for me, and whether or not it sells, isn't really their concern. I paid for it, so...
Fair.
Yeah, because I've never actually known how it was like fully done, is all, so I was just kind of curious.
Asking for a friend, how do I get a book?
Yeah. I'm just checking. It's not like I have like a My Little Pony fan fiction on the side that I need to see if somebody would be interested in.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I have thought about, as some people apparently call it, where they scratch off the barcode, where I just kind of remove any copyrighted material from my story, and like 50 Shades of Grey, or...
I was like, I know that's what they did.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. The Mortal Instruments series, I know, is another one. Yeah, there's a lot of what works out there that were started as fan fiction and, were eventually published. And I mean, I've literally written enough for a whole series of books. So
yeah.
Do it. I could very much have multiple money makers out there.
Oh, definitely. And I mean, like I said, your series is very approachable. You know what I mean? It is very easy to digest the information that's being given, which is, to me, one of the most important factors when like trying to get other people to read things, because you could make something a sloth, and I have. You easily can do that to where it's like everything is so interesting but very difficult to like approach as any sort of reader. And I do find yours very easy for me to sit down and just like read it and continually read it. And like that's what I was saying when we would have Sebastian reading a line 4 or 5 times, and we would just start to read on ahead. It's very easy to get drawn into, and I do think it is a skill that you have, and I am excited to see original stories coming out of you.
Why, thank you.
But like I said, it has been insane the support we've received just for your story.
I believe that Man of Honor is one of the highest viewed videos on our channel.
It is the first one that has hit over 1,000 views.
It's the most popular. It's the only one that's hit over 1,000 views.
Wow.
And funnily enough, the person who first pointed that out to us, I'm pretty sure it was Patella, saying, "Hey, one of your videos
I think it was Patella.
Went over a K," and I was like, "Okay, that's not.
Yeah.
There's no way. That's insane."
Yeah, we've got a Man of Honor at 1.3K, and then the next one is Patella's First Warm Day of the Year at 923.
Also, I don't know what you did with like chapter 3, but that's the one with the most views. I don't.
No, that's
our episode 3. My bad. I was wrong.
Yeah. Naming conventions, little wonky.
Yeah, I was confused for a second, but I was like, wait, what? That's weird. Why does the third one have more views than everything else?
Well, part 3 is the 4th highest view.
Gotcha.
And then part 2 is the 3rd highest view. So actually, all 3 of the episodes of yours are in our top 6 highest view.
You are
videos.
topping our charts.
Wow. Well, I made sure every time there was a video to tell as many people as I could.
We appreciate it.
I definitely advertised.
It definitely worked.
And so far, you've been like one of the most active people to engage with our channel. So for that, like, we are really thankful. You've kind of been one of the bigger reasons for us to continue doing it, and we do appreciate just having you be a part of this, and just like the support you've given us. And I think, honestly, it's probably time we start kind of bringing this down to a close. And
yeah, it's gone on a bit, but I mean, I'm enjoying it. No
exact
complaints.
same for us. I also have, again, more video to edit, but also I just want to make sure that we're, not like circling back to a bunch of the same things we've already talked about, but I do appreciate you coming out here, and I wanted to ask if you had any specific like mentions that you wanted to make of people, plugging that you've wanted to do for yourself, or just sort of anything in general that you want to say to the people who are listening to this.
All I would like to, I guess, say to my list, to anyone who wants to listen to me talk about myself is, well, I imagine you're doing this because you have some interest in writing or fan fiction, and to which case I'd say, listen, what you want, you're probably going to have to write it. And you know what? I hope you do.
Is there any advice you'd give to somebody who's writing, or at least starting out?
Starting out, I definitely say be prepared for writer's block. It will happen. And when it does, as my sister once wisely told me, write anyways. Because that's the only way you're going to cure it. Make a plan of what you're going to write. It will definitely help you keep a very together story, and it'll always give you a roadmap to come back to. And more than anything, it's not your job. Don't suffer too much for your hobby, but sometimes a little pain is what you bring into what you love the most, and that's okay too. Just know your limits.
I think that's pretty sound advice for just about any facet of life as well. It's not your main focus of like, oh, I go work a 9 to 5. You don't need to spend every moment of your day working as hard as possible at something that you want to be your hobby, unless you're trying to make it your job.
Yeah.
Yeah, you guys are right. I'll stop editing as much. This has been a really roundabout way to do a.
We're having an intervention
here, but for real, thank you so much again for coming on here, talking to us, and again, hopefully in the future we're able to work more and more with you to make sure that your stuff's getting some fun, interesting reads to it.
Well, thank you. It's been my pleasure to be here, and I very much look forward to what other stories you're posting, because I know you have so many, and I mean, now that I'm taking a break from writing fan fiction, I'm actually kind of interested to get back into reading some of it with my free time.
Now you're trying to get back onto that binging of the fan fiction, rather.
Exactly. Which probably will lead to me writing more. It's always a vicious cycle that way.
Yep.
Well, then I guess we'll start wrapping it up here, but thank you everybody for listening in on this. Again, thank you so much, that guy smoking a pipe, or should I say Evan. Really appreciate having you out here, and this has been a really fun time getting this all done and just talking, because we've had it in the works for a long while to get this done. I messaged you a long while back, and I'm really excited that we finally got to it, but looks like we'll have to end it in some way. So thank you all so much for watching again, and thank you all so much for listening to an interview.